Welcome back, lovies, and it's time to look at yet another piece of obscure animation history. So what are we looking at today? Well, today we're going back only 10 years to 2005, but historically we're going back all the way to the Blitz 1940s to take a look at what I consider a criminally underrated movie, starring the best of British talent from the time and taking a look at one of the darkest yet most triumphant moments in human history. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Valiant. It's funny, no matter how hard I try, I can never get away from movies that have anthropomorphic animals, turf wars, and dated animation. In any case, we're going to be taking a look at an obscure piece of animation from the mid-2000s from frequent industry Klingons Vanguard Animation, who would later also go on to make the first Happily Never After movie and the Space Chimp series. Since I've not seen any of those films, I struggle to verbally say that Valiant is the best of the films that they've made, since I have no idea of the truth of that sentence, but I'm sure their other movies can't be that bad. Hell, Happily Never After has the great George Carlin in it. Maybe his presence isn't quite a stamp of quality as it used to be. Sorry, mate. In all seriousness though, I have heard some good things about Space Chimps, the first one at the very least, which also has a silver lining that it stars Patrick Warburton and Jane Lynch. But Vanguard Animation seems to be lingering under the waves at the moment, as while their Wikipedia and website has several movies that they claim are currently in production, only a handful of these movies have actually been mentioned outside of their own sources, and their website hasn't been updated since 2011. At least it's interesting to kind of see into my own future, because that's basically going to be me in 5 years. But anyways, enough history, let's move on to Valiant itself. Though if we are talking about a movie set in England during 1940s in the middle of World War II, I have to play this song first. The film stars Ewan McGregor as the title character Valiant, a pipsqueak pigeon who wants nothing more than just to join the Royal Pigeon Messaging Force, a real organisation that operated in the First and Second World War to deliver top-secret messages to the Allied nations. However, everyone says that he's too small to join up.
You could be yay-high, and you're not even hey-high.
Shame on you, Valiant, that didn't stop these guys. But he ventures off to London to sign up anyway, inspired by the heroic acts of his idol, Wing Commander Gutsy, and due to the help of his newly met friend, a combird called Bugsy, who also has pet blue bottles that only show up when it's convenient for the jokes they're in, they manage to get themselves shipped off to boot camp. Even though all Bugsy was trying to do in the process was save his own skin, but ended up roping himself in too far before he could pull out. Next time, use protection, buddy. Anyway, they meet up with their other squad mates, Lofty Worthington Pigeon, a proud and defiant old sod looking to prove his worth on the battlefield, Tailfeather and Toughwood, two bone-headed chaps with big hearts just doing what comes naturally for them, their token lady, that being their nurse dove Victoria, and their drill sergeant, the ruffled feathered Monty, who, sadly, does not utter phrases like this.
I'll PT you and take your asshole for sucking buttermilk!
What a waste. But instead it's his job to get them into shape for the real thing, something that of course is easier said than done.
You bird brains are Squad F. You know what that means?
Squad fantastic!
Iconic!
Squad formidable! Philosophical!
No! It means you are the flyers of the future. The far future.
But when A, B, C, D and E squad have either been shut down by the Germans or eaten by their sworn enemy, the Falcon Interception Squad.
You don't eat your prisoners of war, do you?
Eat you. I'm a vegetarian.
And yet you wear a leather cape.
Another real animal-based army organisation, I think. Though it wouldn't surprise me if someone did try to set that up. Hell, Adolf Hitler himself tried to set up a dog-based training school to teach dogs to Sieg Heil and bark Adolf Hitler, like some sort of Third Reich version of the old sausages dog. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Falcon thing was real too. The army has no choice but to send in the last line, that being F Squad, and it just so happens that the message they're carrying is the message on where to attack on the D-Day landings.
Gentlemen, a change of plan. We now land in Normandy.
Just think though, if one of the previous bird teams had that message on them, we'd have never gotten Private Ryan back. Though whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not sure. Regardless, the movie then becomes a race to get the message to the War Office ASAP after their drop plane is shot down by mortar fire and Gutsy is lost in the scuffle. Though, since their commanding officer was played by Hugh Laurie, it probably would have gone messy even if he was with them.
Row, row, row your punt gently down the stream. Belts off, trousers down, isn't life a scream?
Whilst also conversing with the mice agents of the French Resistance, which I'm disappointed to say was not a real thing, so I'm just going to have to file a case of false historical representation on this movie. I mean, I expected a movie with talking pigeons fighting falcons in World War II by combining together like the Transformers and headbutting each other like fans at a Spinal Tap concert to be 100% accurate. And of course, as I said earlier, fighting off the Falcon forces to prevent their message falling into the darkest of hands. Mr. Tim Curry.
Enough already! You've been jabbering for days!
Will you just try and stay cool?
Are you trying to make me look stupid in front of the other guests?
Don't need any help from me, sir.
At least I'll be well rid of you, fat face.
I didn't make him for you!
The movie itself is about the bravery of these very unlikely heroes trying to do something that seems impossible for even the best in their field, but maybe, just maybe, their unlikely methods and ways are just enough to get them through. And also making constant fart jokes.
Oh dear. Sorry, love.
Oh, dirty bird.
Sadly, there are a lot of those in this movie, but there are a lot of good jokes.
Friend or foe?
Friend. Oh yes, my friend.
And that comes from the best part of this movie, its voice cast. First off, as major secondary character, we have the encapsulating Ricky Gervais, playing one of the few movie roles that he both actually does well in, and in a role that only genuinely he could play, that being your Commodore Garden conman just looking out for his own tail feathers. The problem with old Rick is that even though he's actually hysterically funny, and actually a pretty good actor, he has trouble finding those roles that really utilise his talents. Which sadly is a trait that's almost unanimously shared by all stand-up comedians. But think back to 2005 when Rick was a superstar with stand-up, TV comedy and also podcasts. And yet even since then he hasn't really been able to find that one role that really utilises him well. I mean, even thinking about it now, the three main roles that have defined him as an actor are a stereotypical uptight British boss man, which didn't suit him at all, a talking dog, which really didn't suit him, and a wise-ass fast talker, which a role that should have suited him perfectly down to the ground, and yet somehow it didn't. Simply put, Rick's role in films, in a way, has him typecast into two ways. The casting director putting him in a role that anyone could play, but he was put there in the hopes of getting another audience in, or a role where he is allowed to play himself, but not for very long. And while he has a few movies that are perfect for him, mostly it's because he either wrote them or had a lot of involvement in the production process. Despite being a modern day Eddie Murphy or Robin Williams back when he was trying to become an actor, his attempt didn't really work out as well as it did for those two. In fact, it was more like his film career as a comic actor skipped over the blockbuster success period and went straight to the washed up period. This was only the second movie he'd starred in up to this point, the other one being Dog Eat Dog 4 years ago, and it showcased the ideal role for him in any movie, a somewhat sleazy but kind-hearted couldn't-care-less shyster who is the one that all the other characters hate, but he's always the best part of the film.
I'd love to die. Can't. Not Sunday. Bad for
Are
me.
you finished?
Not quite. Well, listen, maybe I'm not that conscientious, but I do object.
Get back to the barracks!
So essentially any role where he just plays himself. His character also goes through a legitimate arc in where he starts off as a self-centered smart aleck, but realises the importance of teamwork and friendship and all that, and decides to fight the good fight anyway. Now, despite how cliched that might sound, and how he comes to that conclusion a tad unclearly given that nothing indicated that he would realise the importance of that anyway, but whatever, the one thing that he does in the climax though really throws me off, in that he volunteers to take the message across the country to the War Office. He doesn't care the fact that there are things out there that could kill him in a nanosecond. He doesn't care that he's risking life and limb. He's taking that message for king and country and fighting for the freedom of all birds everywhere.
Ricky Gervais, your country salutes you, son.
We also have acting legends John Cleese as Mercury, a prisoner of war in the Falcon camp.
You know they'll send a crack team to rescue me.
Rescue you? You're a pigeon. How important do you think you are?
VIP, very important pigeon.
Jim Broadbent as the previously mentioned Monty.
Gentlemen, welcome to the Royal Homing Pigeon Service.
Hugh Laurie as Wing Commander. No, not that one. Gutsy, in where he essentially is playing the role of Ace Rimmer from Red Dwarf.
Princess Bonjela, Ace Rimmer. There'll be time for explanations later, and hopefully some sex.
John Hurt as Felix the Seagull, an old salt retired and spending his days as a barkeep.
That boy's gonna get creamed.
Which apparently old sailors in TV shows and movies just do a lot, apparently. Does no sailor spend their discharged salary wisely? Sharon Horgan as the mouse rebel Charles de Gaulle, a name that tells you all you really need to know about her character, to be perfectly honest with you. And even Annette Badland as Valiant's mother.
At least have some breakfast before you go. Oh, Mum! Mum!
Yes, a Slitheen and an EastEnders regular stars in another thing with dodgy effects and angry cockneys. Regardless, all of these voice actors do a fantastic job providing the performances that give their iconic personalities the ability to flourish, or are so good you can't even tell it's them. Seriously, who would ever guess that this guy was voiced by this guy?
Why is there never a big red button?
Essentially, this is a movie that, while it does use a little bit of typecasting in the casting process, it does it with actors who have roles that they know how to play expertly. Hell, I've lost count of the amount of times Tim Curry was the villain in the movie. If all villain actors were to live up their reputation and take over the world someday, he'd be sitting at the very end of that table with Tom Hiddleston, Jon Voight, Jeremy Irons, and Gene Hackman. Though, sadly, Alan Rickman and Dennis Hopper can't attend those meetings anymore. Rest in peace, buddies. But good voice acting only works if you have good characters to go along with them, and despite being your cliched characters in a typical F-Troop style scenario, these are pretty enjoyable characters. You've got your posh, stiff-upper-beaked toff, the two rugby pigeons played by the best cannon and ball stand-ins that the casting crew could get, the con artist, the optimistic one, the hard-ass, and the Nazis.
You want us to pluck out his feathers?
And clip his wings?
Hurt his feelings?
Though, of course, this being a kids' movie, the villains are never actually properly identified as members of the Third Reich.
The Fuhrer would not be pleased, Fräulein. Senkaichi!
Basically, this movie is the pigeon version of Stripes. Bugsy is John, Valiant is Russell, Monty is Holker, Lofty is... Francis? Okay, you've got me on that one, but Tailfeather and Toughwood are essentially Ox doubled. Though I don't think we want to see them remove some dove's bra in a mud wrestling competition. This movie's got enough innuendos as it is without that going on. Also, I always thought that John Larroquette might have been a Nazi. Now we're just putting the implications into the forefront here. Though speaking of which, while the villains of this movie are not the most entertaining in the world, their voice actors do make it worth slogging through their scenes, including the majestically talented Tim Curry and the late great Rick Mayall.
What does a man with a 2-foot cock have for breakfast? This morning I had a boiled egg.
We also get some interval with our villains desperately trying to get the truth out of John Cleese, which can get a laugh every once in a while, if only because you think of the actual actors doing this to each other.
We have ways of making you squawk.
What kind of birds are you?
The animation is... well, in all honesty, is not an amazing feat, but for an independent company from the mid-2000s, it's not that bad. The facial expressions are vivid and match the dialogue flawlessly, the textures are very well rendered, the movement of the light and shadows works really well, and it's really colourful. The only part I'd say where it really falls down is the backgrounds. For some reason, they've decided to animate it like it was an old cell cartoon from the 80s and 90s, to the point where the background does make it look very still and lifeless. But even with that, they do look okay, and it does create this interesting feel in all of the locations that you don't often get in a CGI animated movie. It gives it kind of the feel of a 2D style cartoon in a CGI movie, which is really hard to do. See, Paperman, it's easier than having to redefine the boundaries of animation, you just got to make the backgrounds look cheaper. So while the animation isn't necessarily a marvel, it does look presentably decent, and just to kind of exemplify why this looks good for an independent company from the time, time, when this movie was released, they were just starting to make Food Fight. So that just goes to show how this could have been way worse. But it's not surprising that it turned out good, with the producer of the first two Shrek movies being on board, and also getting support from Disney. Naturally, they'd be able to get good results, and I'm sure that neither of them would waste $65 million in making this movie. If they did, I'd expect them to be in The Hague by now. While this movie isn't exactly looked on as a classic, or even that favourably by some people, I feel that a person's begrudging or jubilant nature towards any movie depends on their exposure to it, and I was certainly no exception when it came to this one. When I first saw this movie, I was about 11 years old, and back in my day, most 11-year-olds learnt about the Second World War extensively in history class, and history was always my favourite subject, so I was like a lapdog to a plastic bowl in history class. So the idea of World War II was already in the gears and cogs of my brain factory by the time I saw this movie, so this was the ideal time for me to see anything like this, and because of that, it made my eternal love for the movie be ingrained into my psyche forever. It's the same thing that happened to me when I first saw X-Men First Class, as I just happened to be learning about the Cold War at that time. Though, sadly, putting down on my history paper, the Cuban Missile Crisis didn't cause World War III because Magneto was being distracted by Charles Xavier didn't get me a very high mark, surprisingly. So while I do understand why some people don't like this movie, since it's definitely not perfect, watching me sends me back a ways to the days when I was just an elbow-high, snot-faced little toe rag obsessed with bomb shelters, tanks, and home gardening. But even without those elements, I still feel that this movie is extremely entertaining. I think that a lot of people weren't expecting what to see when they came out and saw this movie. I mean, its premise is something that seems ideal for a kids' movie, but it's not something you would see very often. In fact, it feels a lot like a film idea that Don Bluth turned down in the 80s and Vanguard just so happened to find the unfinished script for it. But because this movie was a very unique idea and something that hadn't been tried a lot before, means a lot of people didn't really know what they wanted from this movie. They weren't sure if it's what they actually wanted. It has that mix of adult humour from its voice cast, but the jokes themselves are very child-oriented most of the time, though there is the occasional funny adult gag in there once in a while.
Hello, handsome.
But even so, this does create an interesting juxtaposition that only some can really get into. Thankfully though, I am one of those people, and I know that there are many others like that too, since this movie does have a small fan base. Not enough to keep Vanguard off the dole, but it still has one nonetheless, and the movie ends with a lovely little note on how many animals were awarded the Dickon Medal, the highest decoration an animal can receive, and was awarded to several pigeons, dogs, horses, and even a cat. But no foxes. Typical. Foxes never get anything. Apart from a cap in the arse from some posh person on a horse. In any case, while we may never see a movie this bold or unique again, it's nice to have this one movie to stand out to be a lovely tribute to some vermin interceptors from the past. Men as you were. That'll look good on the bloopers.